Hi everyone. So it's been a few days since I've had a video, and there's a reason for it. And that is because I have been traveling. I traveled to China, actually, um, from the beginning of September to about the middle of September. So I think it was like September 3rd through the 15th. Um, and it was great. And I kind of wanted to talk about a few of my impressions that I had when I was there. Number one is that there are a lot of babies. So I would say, I thought, well, maybe the kids are mostly in school, but then the children never seem to outnumber the babies. So I would see kids coming out of school during the, because if I'm touring, obviously I'm out during the day when kids are mostly in school. So that would explain part of the reason of why disproportionately children are under the age of 2, but it doesn't explain how it seemed to still be disproportionately younger children when during the weekends or the evenings. So, maybe school age kids are, taking their, additional lessons. I mean, there are other possible reasons, but I do wonder if there has been a baby boom that has not been reported. Because it just seemed like that there was a lot of babies, children that were under the age of 2 in relative to the, children between the ages of 2 and 10. So I'm curious about that one. I don't have any answers about that, but that was just my observed experience. So my travel plans were Beijing to Xi'an to Shanghai. And so that's basically, I landed in Beijing and then I went to Xi'an and then I went to Shanghai. So in Beijing, I saw, Great Wall, and I think Xi'an was the terracotta soldiers and Shanghai was, Shanghai Towers. And one other thing, you may notice that I'm a little bit stuffy. Xi'an, the trip from Beijing to Xi'an was by bullet train, so it was pretty fun. But I think that is a lot of countryside, and the countryside is very similar in the foliage to Minnesota and Wisconsin. And because of that, there are a lot of allergens. I did have an allergic reaction, which resulted in a lot of congestion, which I'm still struggling with today because, anytime there's allergens, there's congestion, and that leads to higher risk of infection and likely, the consequences. And then I land in Minnesota when I get back, which is also high allergen, but at least I'm more used to the allergens in Minnesota. So it's getting a little better day by day, but the allergens were pretty high. Another thing that I noticed traveling in Shanghai is that the tour guides would speak a lot. They would have a lot of information. They were great. They would have, information that they would be telling us on the way to the site, and then they would have information at the site. They were talking. But when I asked them a question, a lot of times they did not know the answer to the question. A lot of times they did not even understand my question. That really was enlightening to me because I have been trying to learn Chinese for years, and it is a struggle. Like, I now test out at HSK4, so there's like now 8 levels. There used to be 6 levels of HSK, so I would have been a 4 of 6. So if you're at 44 out of 6, that's actually pretty high level, and to still not be able to speak. So that means I can read, I can write, and I can recite back, specific answers to specific questions. But I actually, trying to have a conversation with somebody is a whole different thing, and I cannot seem to do it. And so going to China and realizing these people speak English on a daily basis and they have all this information, they can speak pretty well. They still cannot have a conversation, back and forth conversation. And it's not a knock on them. That's actually a relief to me that, okay, I'm on the right track. I know a lot, but I still can have a lot, a conversation. And that is probably due to lack of exposure and lack of ability to practice. So I'm actually doing quite well. So I'm at HSK4, but I think that what they do then is they have a memorized script. They know exactly what they need to talk about, and they recognize, and I don't know if they memorize it word for word, but they know the words that they need to say, and they can say those, fairly fluently. There's a few misunderstandings. It's basically, instructions of when to arrive where, and that was largely due to the way that they had said things. that could be interpreted two different ways. But overall, pretty good. So what that means to me is that really that output is really about understanding what you want to say, what you need to be able to say, and being able to say that. So you don't need to know the language, you need to know what you need to say. I don't know if that makes any sense, but basically, if you have memorized, HSK 4 level worth of stuff, which is what, like hundreds and hundreds of words. I'm not sure which, like possibly I'm up to like 800 or 1,000 or something like that of Chinese characters and Chinese grammar and all of that stuff, but still not to be able to have a conversation. But they have taken just a few pages, probably. Like if you were to give a 10-minute speech and then memorize that, that would surely be shorter memorization than several years of learning an entire language. And so basically, that has told me that I need to learn what I need to say, what I would want to say in a conversation, and really focus on that. Also, continuing on my HSK, right? I wanted to get HSK 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 7, 8, which would be the 7, HSK 8 would be the top level of HSK of Chinese language learning, but also spending equal time in knowing exactly what I want to say would be beneficial. Another thing I really learned about China when I was there is that, if you've watched shows about China, it's actually pretty technologically advanced. And when you come back to the United States, you're traveling back in time. When you go to China, you're traveling forward in time as far as technology and their grasp of, a lot of different things. There's robots in China. There's, Alipay in China. You don't even use credit cards anymore. I mean, credit cards are out of date. I mean, they're in the future and we are in the past in the United States. But that being said, there is a different way of living. So in America, we have a lot of poverty. We have a lot of homeless tent cities. I did not see any tent cities in China. And I know that there's a lot of conspiracy theories. I think that the US government is really trying hard to paint China as a really bad place, partly because China has social programs that the United States does not want to give its own citizens, basically. That's why there is a propaganda against China. They don't want us to wake up and see universal health care. They don't want us to wake up and see universal pension. They don't want us to wake up and see low crime rates and living in safety. They don't want us to wake up. The U.S. government does not want us to wake up to that. So there's a lot of propaganda against China. And one of the propagandas is they say, well, there's no homeless in China because they're locking the homeless people up. This is my response to this. And based on what I saw in China, is that they don't have homeless cities. They don't necessarily have homeless people. Do they have crazy people? Okay. So if you were to walk down to Minneapolis, Minnesota, you would find a lot of people, yelling at you, or, I went down to Chicago just the other day and I was yelled at in the street by a crazy guy. It's because there's a lot of drugs in the United States. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of, homeless people. When they talk about the causes of homelessness is number one is being in foster care. I'm not saying that's a cause, but it's a very much of a correlation. And so people not having a family that they can count on in the background is about 50% of the homeless people. But also there's a combination too of our drug use. So we have drugs, and sure, drugs are technically illegal in the United States, but nobody does anything about it. They don't actually arrest people. And if they do, they don't actually put them in jail. China has strict punishment, and it's not punishment to get people, it's deterrent. You're not going to commit a crime if you know that the consequences of getting caught are steep. In the United States, they slap you, slap you on the wrist, right? There's no consequences for doing things. You might go to jail for like a month or something like that. It's just no consequences. But in China, they have more consequences, so people are less likely to do harmful things. But did I see any homeless people? I would say at a percentage, 1% of what America is. So for every 100 people on the street that I see in America, I would see one in China. And it was usually due to seemingly perhaps mental illness. So do they still have mental illness in China? Yes, but at a much, much lower degree. So in all the places that I went to, Xi'an had one guy that yelled at us. So if I was traveling all the time in major cities in the United States, it would be nearly constant as you walk down the street. There's people that are on drugs and they're hanging halfway over because of, I don't know, that type of drug that makes you hang over. Um, they'd be yelling at you, especially as a woman. I do get yelled at by the homeless people because I'm an easy target. I look vulnerable. That's why they pick on me. Okay. So, so then if you're a guy and you're like, they're not yelling at me, it's because you're a guy. If you are a young, or, well, not young, but if you're a woman that looks like me, I look a little bit vulnerable. I'm not large. I'm actually kind of small in general, generally speaking, statistically speaking, I'm smaller than most American women. So I'm a woman, I'm smaller, and so therefore I am an easy target. I don't look like I'm going to hurt anybody in return to them yelling at me. So I am more likely to be yelled at, period. And there was one crazy guy in China. I don't even know what he was saying. The tour guide interpreted what he had said because it said something about like, he was trying to talk about basically where you could buy such and such. So it was like a nonsensical phrase. Like it was like, you don't usually yell at people to tell them where you can buy stuff. And he was a little bit disheveled. But that is at a very minor. So my point is that if they were locking up all the crazy people, why was he out on the street? Right? So they're not. They're not locking up all the crazy people. They're just so much more rare in China. Right? I would have seen that left and right in the United States. But in all the cities that I went through, all those major cities, one, right? And one could even argue that he was just weird, right? So maybe he was stressed or whatever, but it's just so much less homelessness, so much less crazy people in China. As a general rule, I felt safer walking down the streets because there's no people like laying on the ground. The scariest part for me in China, bar none, the entire trip from my home and back, scariest part was when I landed in LA. I'd just been in China for all that time. I landed in LA. Lo and behold, I did not plan to have to go take a hotel thing, but the airport was closed, so I thought, oh, I'll just hang out in the airport for a couple hours. But I didn't realize is that I had landed after the airport closed, and check-in wasn't for several hours. So there I was in the middle of the night. I needed an Uber. I took an Uber, and there, scary looking guy, but I didn't know what to do. So I took an Uber to a hotel, and at the hotel, right in front of the hotel door, there was a homeless guy. The Uber guy would not driving me up to the door, so I had to walk past the homeless guy, the homeless crazy guy on the street. And when I got to the hotel in LA, there was a car that had seen me walking to the hotel that was driving one way, driving the correct way. They saw me going to the hotel. They drove backwards following me. That was the scariest part because it was about a minute. I'm banging at the door because I've got the homeless guy and I've got this car full of guys, following me backwards on the street. I'm banging on the door. The guy in the hotel wouldn't let me in. When he finally did let me in, it was like several minutes. I'm banging on the door. I'm thinking, okay, this is how I die. This is how it all ends. Thanks, guy, for not letting me in the hotel door. He said, well, there was somebody in line before me. So I was like, okay, so you couldn't reach over 2 seconds and open the door for me, the little button that was at his desk to open the door for me because there was a guy in line before me. This is how little American men care about the safety of women. So that was the scariest part of my trip in China, was actually landing back at the airport in the United States. So that is my perception, is that for all that time here, I don't even speak the language. I'm walking around because the tours would be during the day. So in the evenings, I'm walking around China downtown on strange streets. I'm walking around. I feel safer there, even though I don't even speak the language. I don't even have apps. I might get lost. I felt safer there than I did in the United States within a few hours of landing here. So, yes, it's much more safe there. Just as I'm walking around downtown in China, I was in Shanghai, for example. even if people don't speak English, when I asked for help, like in the store or on the street, they would always do their best to stumble through whatever help they could give me, right? Their heart was in it. Even if their ability to understand me was not there, their heart was in it. So that made me feel a lot more safe. Does that make sense? Like then the hotel guy who didn't even care that I'm out on the street at midnight downtown LA and I'm banging on the door. Obviously there's a problem there. He doesn't even care to push the button to let me in versus in China, they're stopping what they're doing to say, hey, yeah, let's just, the store down there. But they're saying it in very disjointed and, we're trying to do it through a translator app, but we're making it, right? So that is why I felt so much safer in China is that there's just people were better natured, right? They were willing to help. And yeah, I think those are my major impressions. One other thing is that I used to live in California and I had a lot of exposure because the person that I dated in California for a few years was half Vietnamese, half Chinese. I had a lot of exposure into both of those cultures because, his family was split. And our meals were primarily just tons and tons of vegetables, and they were cooked in just one of the things I miss most about him and his family was the food. I mean, the food was amazing, like amazing, right? It was just delicious. I couldn't eat it every day. I have an Irish, American stomach that I can't handle all those vegetables every day because they did make me constipated. But to be frank, but for what I could eat, I would love them, and then I would just have to tell my significant other, I need to eat, American style food because my stomach is arguing with all of this, East Asian food. But it was delicious. When I went to China, rather than having all of that food that I found so delicious when I was with him, they actually had mostly, vastly in Shanghai, Xi'an, and in Beijing, all of those actually had a much the same cuisine of mostly noodle soup, noodles and beef, noodles and lamb, noodles and chicken. Those were most of the meals when I went to those three cities. Now, I had mentioned to the tour guide, they said, we have any feedback? And I said, well, you might want to have some more Americanized, maybe cuisine or maybe even more variety because just those it just seemed like restaurant after restaurant after restaurant served the same food, and it really was not very appetizing to me. I found it to be very low salt, and if you've watched my other videos, you know that I actually have a little bit of a low electrolyte naturally. I do supplement my diet with salt in order to feel good. And in China, there wasn't salt available. There wasn't salt on the tables. The food wasn't salted. It was just a very low salt diet. That surprised me because there's all the stereotypes of Chinese food being very high salt, but that was not my experience on the ground. And so if I had anything to do over, it is bringing more snack food, bringing more palatable food that is, more for the American taste buds, and bringing more salt with me everywhere I go, and also seeking out more restaurants because I think that my allergies that have bugged me was partly due to the poor diet, right? So I have allergies anyway. I go to a foreign country and I'm unexposed to those allergies. If I lived in China, I would probably eat the local honey. That's what I do now to manage my allergies. The NIH, the National Institute of Health, have actually done some research on this, that eating the local honey on a daily basis, if you do that over time, will help with your allergies. So I do not, obviously, I've never done that in China. So if I lived there, I would eat the local honey every day. But so you combine that, the high allergens, we were out driving through, from Beijing to Xi'an. I got a lot of allergen exposure. I got 3 different geographic locations worth of allergen exposure, plus the poor diet. All of that really took a toll on my health. Other things that I would say is that, it was amazing. If you go to like the Great Wall, there are museums around. Those museums are really great addition to the actual venue, right? And so I would allow time to also see the museums. I've noticed that the tour, much like the restaurants, their souvenir shops are all identical. So I think that maybe it would be great. I know in Minnesota we have free business classes. I think the Chinese government would do great if they did some, business classes that would talk about product differentiation, because that was not really the case. Like, restaurants with all the same thing is not really good product differentiation, and probably would help boost their businesses if they offered some free classes on that, because I noticed that was a general trend. Every city that I went to, all the stores carried the very same things. The restaurants carried the very same things. The souvenir shops carried the very same things, rather than focusing on some product differentiation. Because the only way you can do that, if you're all carrying the same things, then the only thing you can do is price reduction and lowering your profit margins in order to make some money. So that's, I actually have a degree in business, obviously. So, and I noticed that. And so then in Xi'an, when I went to the terracotta, again, the museum was a great addition. Allow for some time to go through the museum. And then in Shanghai, the towers, they always show all these videos of the Shanghai lighting up at night. And that is really only a fraction of what Shanghai is all about. I really enjoyed going around Shanghai during the day. It was great just seeing the Oriental Pearl and the Shanghai Tower, and just being down in that business district. I would really, if you go to Shanghai, to really spend some extra time and allow some extra time to go around those same business districts during the day. They are phenomenal. I just really loved being down there. And of course, they said that when I was down there, I was basically in those business districts, in the shopping districts during the day, during their not busy time. Weekdays during the day, they don't have as many people. It was still very busy. And so I would imagine if it was during the, high traffic time, that there would be tons and tons of people. So that's basically what those things that I learned when being in China. I hope to do some other videos about my trip and other things that I learned as I, think about things. Another thing is, always carry toilet paper. They don't always have toilet paper in their bathrooms, and they do have squat toilets. If I had to do it over again, I would restrict my fluids in the morning so that I wouldn't have to use those squat toilets. I don't think they're very hygienic, just because the angle at which you go down is very close to the urinal. And so that means that if there's any splashback, you're going to get it. As a woman, you're going to get that splashback, which is not hygienic. That's how diseases spread. So I would say that the squat toilets are not that great. And because they don't have water in them, which means that they don't flush very well. And so they are very, just not very hygienic. So if you can avoid the squat toilets and, do the thrown toilets, I don't know how you call them, the regular style toilets, it's much more hygienic. Of course, you have to sit on them and sit on the seat, but I always put toilet paper on the seat itself, wipe it off, or I hover, right? So those are the few, options you can have. But, just always carry a little bit of toilet paper in your backpack. Other than that, I think everything went well, and it's far better than ever I saw on the videos. I was, pleasantly surprised that, you never know if things are going to be worse or better. I thought they were better. I thought Xi'an was a little bit dirty. Of the three cities, I would say Xi'an was the dirtiest. And the food vendors in the Muslim Quarter, they had a lot of food that was sitting out for hours. And again, the vendors all sold, well, not all of them, but the vast majority of the vendors sold the very same thing. They sold fried squid, they sold pomegranate juice, and some of these mushrooms, like they look like marshmallow squares. They sold the same food at nearly every vendor. That's not product differentiation. That's going to cut your profit margins, and you're just not going to sell as much. And so, they could really use some business classes. But it also, because the food is just sitting out, the squid, they fried the squid and then they sat it out without any, they would have enough food to sell for an entire day's worth of food, and it would just sit out. And so that's, just not very sanitary. And so that was not the highlight of my trip, you could say. I would say that the Beijing Great Wall was a highlight of my trip. I really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed I think it's called the Goose Pagoda or something like that. It's called the Goose Temple, Goose Pagoda. I really enjoyed that. and I really enjoyed downtown Shanghai. I'd probably say that Shanghai was the highlight of the trip. I just thought that, you know, the the buildings are amazing. You know, the downtown was amazing. I mean, I just seeing the Shanghai tour, you know, Oriental Pearl in person was so much better than I'd ever seen on in real life or on the photos and the videos. Just seeing it, I just didn't think it would be that pretty. I just thought it was a, you know, a a building, but it's actually really shiny, and the skies are actually very blue. And you know, obviously, if it's humid outside, the skies are not going to be blue. But I had some really nice sunny days. I had great weather every day, so I really was fortunate on that. But yeah, I would say that Shanghai was actually you know, it was pretty cool. Pretty amazing buildings and everything. So, um, yeah, that was my trip into Shanghai, into China, and I will post some other videos of, you know, just sites that I saw, things that I saw. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Um, if you like this, and if you have any questions about what I saw in China, please post them in the description below. I would love to go into anything that brought up any questions for you. Thanks. All right.